Well, it's just a normal military exercise. I mean, it's great when you are there if you're not used to hearing gunfire go off and explosions. But the harsh reality is that behind the scenes, Zapad 25 is a joint Belarus-Russian exercise. It lasted one in 2022. It is worth setting some context here because it was back in December 24 that Putin and Lukashenko signed a deal that effectively guaranteed security for Belarus, put a bit of a nuclear umbrella around that as well. And therefore, this exercise is more just to test that they can operate effectively together. As a former military guy, it's one thing saying my army can operate with yours, but there are always interoperability challenges, and that's what these exercises. Two phases, one of which is air-land defences. Second phase for this exercise is to clear territory, do sort of counter-offensive work as well. I think it's worth putting some context, though, because we understand there are 3,000 Russian forces involved, about 10,000 Belarusian forces. Sounds like a lot, but the last time they did this exercise, it was over 200,000. So it's clearly much smaller. They have been talking about doing some nuclear drills as well, probably some sabre rattling. And on Sunday, they did some of the Zircon missile, which is one of their hypersonic missiles. Russia did a test on this. Now, they don't have many of these missiles, and they want to keep them for the war. So I suspect, we're seeing one launched here, I suspect that part of this is a message to the West that, you know, just because we're distracted in the war in Ukraine doesn't mean we don't have some military capability available.
And that interoperability, we saw the challenges with North Korean troops, for example, being brought in to work alongside the Russians. Obviously, language barriers present there, not in the way that they would be between Russia and Belarus. But it is hard for countries to work together alongside each other. NATO is refining this as well, isn't it? It's responding in its own manner, in many respects in a very similar manner.
No, in a very similar manner. I think the part of, as you say, NATO individual countries are very capable, but you do need to be able to have a credible military force. And it is interesting that, worth pointing out that back in 2022, when Russia mounted its invasion of Ukraine, some of its forces came through Belarus. It's the quickest way to Kyiv. So any exercise in there are going to worry them. But it is interesting that Poland, out to the west there, they've been mounting a massive exercise. Iron Defender 25, 30,000 troops involved in that. Much bigger exercise. The United States and Canada are involved there. If we work our way around clockwise, Lithuania, big exercise there. Thunder Strike, 17,000. Go up to Latvia, 12,000 forces. And, of course, also in Germany, they're also mounted a big exercise, as well as the US, called Iron Fist as well. And, of course, the context of all of this is the drone strikes, heightened tensions, the fact that the Russian ambassador has been hauled into the Foreign Office again. I don't think Putin will be quaking in his boots, quite frankly. This is all much more hardened military. And I think the problem I would take from this is all the way around the border now, heightened tensions, more military force on the ground. Just supposing another one of those drone strikes was to go awry from Russia, rather than landing in a field, there's a danger it starts to land on NATO forces.
30,000 troops.
Just imagine what would happen if there were any casualties as a result of that.
So it's more miscalculation at the moment that's the bigger risk. And as you start putting in all of these drills, all of this activity, all of this, you know, as Ivor said there, 150 kilometres from the Lithuanian border, that's where the risk lies, is it? Misjudgment and error rather than a direct interaction.
Yeah, and I think, and actually Russia is not stupid here. I think it's realised these exercises don't get planned overnight. They've been in place for some months. I suspect what's happened with the drone strikes, Russia's backing off some of the threats here. The positive side, it's trying to show NATO we've still got spare capacity, and also, if you're feeling emboldened, we can still reinforce Belarus. But the rethink that's happened with Russia, these were originally going to be focusing on nuclear drills. That has been dampened significantly. They were also going to be happening very close to the border. They've all been moved much further back and reduced in size, and the political rhetoric is the same. I think for me, though, the really interesting bit is the West is having to respond, but it's responding in a defensive manner at the moment. Defence is not necessarily... Attack is often the best form of defence. I do wonder, are we just going to wait until more Russian drones come and land on NATO territory? Or is this the time, then, a no-fly zone that actually Ukraine, some of its territory is protected by NATO, extending its umbrella over some of Ukraine?
Saying there an argument for NATO to kind of take the front foot on this rather than constantly being reactionary.
Well, do you just stand in the corner and wait for your opponent just to keep smashing away at you?
But then that challenges the whole suggestion that NATO's just a defensive force, doesn't it? Does that not feed into the narrative from the Kremlin, at least, of like, well, look, you're doing stuff to prepare?
No, and we're into the politics of it. But let's be quite clear. Despite what Putin says, Russia invaded Ukraine.
No, totally.
Russia is responsible for the war. The fact that Ukraine isn't in NATO, we're standing back and watching. But ultimately, that if Ukraine was to fall, it threatens the Western security. And as soon as now Russia is testing the West by throwing not one, not two,
19.
but dozens of drones across the border. Just imagine if that was London. Ultimately, we've got to stand up to Putin at some stage, however unpalatable, because he's not going to stop unless he's forced.
Sean Bell, thank you so much.